It was a kind of moment that brought hundreds of people to a respectful hush, not in a theatre or at a concert, but in an outdoor forum in Canberra where a former leader of a nation stood before a curious crowd. This wasn't a ceremonial speech full of polished platitudes or political spin. Instead, it was a candid reflection, one that traveled far beyond local headlines and into the heart of global debate. As cameras rolled and listeners leaned in, Australia's former Prime Minister spoke with remarkable clarity and honesty about something that many political leaders tiptoe around or avoid entirely: the role of the British monarchy in the 21st century. It remains, he said with quiet conviction, an anachronism. Those two words, simple, direct, and loaded with implication, set off ripples in political circles around the world. It was not merely an academic observation. It was a bold challenge from a leader who once held one of the highest offices in his country, and his words struck at the heart of a relationship that has defined Australia's history for more than 2 centuries. To understand why his remarks reverberated so broadly, we have to go back to the roots of the connection between Australia and the British Crown, a connection that is deep, complex, historical, and, for many, emotional. Australia was once a set of distant colonies under British rule, a land charted by explorers and governed by administrators appointed from London. Over time, those colonies evolved into a federated nation with its own constitution, legal system, and democratic institutions. Yet the symbolic connection to the British monarch remained part of Australia's political structure. For decades, Australians voted in elections, debated policy, and shaped their own society while still acknowledging an inherited symbol of authority, a monarch who lived thousands of miles away, whose role in everyday Australian life was largely ceremonial, yet constitutionally significant. For some citizens, that link was cherished as a connection to tradition and a shared heritage. For others, it was an artifact of a bygone era, a relic whose relevance was continually questioned as Australia matured as an independent nation. When a former Prime Minister publicly declared that the monarchy was out of step with contemporary Australia, it wasn't a criticism rooted in personal pique or political opportunism. It was, instead, a reflection of deeper national conversations that have been simmering for years. Australia's relationship with the Crown has never been monolithic. In urban centres, among younger Australians, and in increasingly diverse communities, polls and public discussions have shown a growing sentiment that Australia ought to define its own identity, free from inherited constitutional ties that reflect a colonial past more than a modern future. Yet even as some press for change, others hold fast to tradition, arguing that the monarchy provides stability, a ceremonial non-partisan figurehead, and a sense of continuity that transcends electoral cycles. The former Prime Minister's comments tapped directly into this tension. Rather than dithering with euphemism or softening his language for diplomatic effect, he framed the monarchy in the stark terms of anachronism, a word that suggests not just oldness, but misalignment with the times. It is a critique not of individuals, but of institutions whose original purpose may no longer match their contemporary function. For a nation that has prided itself on charting its own path, participating in global forums, and asserting its sovereign interests on the world stage, this critique resonated with powerful rhetorical force. But what does it mean to call something an anachronism? At its core, it implies that the institution in question belongs to a different era, an era whose logic, values, and needs have shifted. Centuries ago, when monarchies wielded political authority and dynastic rule determined diplomatic alignments and national direction, the presence of a distant sovereign in another hemisphere would have made sense within that historical context. Today, when democratic self-determination, representative governance, and popular accountability are foundational to modern politics, the suggestion that an unelected monarch should remain part of a republic's constitutional framework can feel incongruous to many. The former Prime Minister didn't stop at labeling the monarchy outdated. His address delved into the implications of this perception for Australia's sense of identity. He spoke of Australia's transformation over decades, from a collection of colonial outposts under Crown authority to a nation with its own distinct cultural, political, and legal identity. He reminded his audience that Australia had fought its own wars, made its own alliances, and developed its own moral compass on issues ranging from human rights to foreign policy. In this context, he asked, why should ultimate constitutional authority remain symbolically tethered to a figure who plays no active role in Australian governance? These remarks were not without controversy. Predictably, they ignited debate in newsrooms, parliaments, and community forums across the country. Supporters of republicanism, the belief that Australia should become a republic with an Australian head of state, welcome the comments as a long overdue acknowledgement of a reality that many have sensed for years. They argued that the monarchy, however revered by some, no longer reflected Australia's demographic diversity, its geopolitical alignments, or its cultural evolution. To them, redefining the nation's constitutional structure was not an act of rebellion, but one of maturity. Detractors, on the other hand, voiced concerns that such rhetoric threatened to erode cherished traditions and risk dividing the nation. For many Australians, the monarchy is not merely a political institution, but a symbol intertwined with personal and collective history. It evokes images of shared pageantry, significant state moments, and a lineage that stretches back for generations. Even among those who support constitutional reform in principle, there is recognition that changing a country's foundational structure is a complicated endeavor, one that requires careful deliberation, deep public consensus, and an appreciation for the emotional attachments that people have to inherited symbols. The former Prime Minister's honest take did not exist in a vacuum. It followed years of incremental developments, polls showing shifts in public sentiment, cultural narratives questioning colonial legacies, and political leadership grappling with evolving national identity. In the decades after World War II, Australia expanded its diplomatic reach, cultivated multilateral alliances, and embraced diversity driven by immigration from around the globe. Alongside this expansion came a natural questioning of institutions that appeared, at least to some, rooted in traditions of a very different era. But redefining national identity is no simple task. It involves not just a legal change, such as amending a constitution, but also a process of collective storytelling, negotiation, and mutual respect. For a nation with multicultural foundations and an increasingly global outlook, the task of reimagining symbols of state requires a delicate balance between honoring heritage and embracing evolution. For many Australians, this balance necessitates thoughtful engagement rather than abrupt upheaval. As responses poured in from political figures, scholars, and everyday citizens, the conversation became richer, more nuanced, and inevitably more personal. Some argued that the monarchy can continue to serve a symbolic purpose without impeding national autonomy. Others insisted that any institution that does not emerge from the democratic will of the people should eventually yield to one that does. Religious communities, indigenous leaders, and civic groups each brought perspectives shaped by their unique relationship to Australia's history and future aspirations. In the midst of this dialogue, the former Prime Minister's remarks served not as a definitive statement of policy, but as an invitation to reflect on what the nation values, where it has come from, and where it wants to go. He reminded his listeners that symbols carry power, but their meaning is not fixed. It evolves as people re-examine their relevance in light of contemporary realities. By questioning the monarchy's place in modern Australia, he encouraged a broader conversation about identity, sovereignty, and the values that bind a nation together. As the days passed and media coverage continued, experts weighed in with historical context, legal analyses, and comparative perspectives. They looked at how other countries, including former dominions like Canada and New Zealand, have navigated similar questions about constitutional ties to the British Crown. Some pointed to referendums held in the past, where Australians voted on Republican models with varying degrees of support, while others highlighted ongoing debates in Commonwealth nations about the future of monarchy in democratic societies. But beyond the technical discussions, the real heart of the debate lay in how ordinary Australians saw themselves in their country. In cafes, living rooms, and social media threads, people shared what it meant to them, personally, culturally, and politically. Some saw the former Prime Minister's comments as a breath of fresh air, a clear articulation of a sentiment many had long felt but never voiced. Others expressed concern, not because they oppose reform, but because they fear that changing long-standing symbols could create unnecessary division or distract from more pressing national priorities. In his closing remarks at that forum, the former Prime Minister acknowledged the complexity of the topic. He did not demand immediate action or propose a specific blueprint for constitutional change. Instead, he emphasized the importance of open dialogue, respectful debate, and collective reflection. He urged Australians to consider not just whether an institution is old, but whether it is aligned with the values and aspirations of the people it is meant to represent. His honesty, he suggested, was an invitation to think not just as citizens bound by history, but as agents shaping the future. Whether or not Australia moved toward becoming a republic, the former Prime Minister's remarks will likely remain a defining moment in the ongoing conversation about national identity. They reflect a growing willingness among political leaders to address difficult questions with candor and a recognition that institutions, like the people they serve, must adapt to changing times. And as the debate unfolds, one thing becomes clear. The question is no longer whether Australia should have this conversation, but how it chooses to have it. The answer will reveal much about the nation's values, its sense of self, and its place in a world where old traditions and new aspirations constantly intersect. In the end, calling the British monarchy an anachronism in modern Australia is not merely a critique of a historical institution. It is an invitation to consider a nation's journey from colony to sovereign state and to reflect on what it means to define oneself on one's own terms. That conversation, rich, messy, and deeply human, is exactly the kind of dialogue that transforms societies and shapes the future.